Hey guys, it's Junior. Welcome back to my channel at Horsepower Warehouse. Today's episode is going to be about something that I've been questioned about quite a bit. You guys know I do a lot of classic car builds and I'm always digging into engines and doing restorations on them and so on and so forth. So everyone asks me, what should I run in my car in terms of fluids? I mean, there's a lot to be said in terms of recommendations for what you actually should be putting in your classic car. There's a lot of no-nos, stuff that you do not want to do. So that's kind of what I'm going to cover today. I'm going to try not to break my traditional style of walking around the shop and showing you what we've got going this week. But in addition to that, I'm just going to supplement it with information about fluids and maintenance. So that's the purpose of today's video. Thank you for joining me. So let's jump right into it. First and foremost, we're going to talk about fuel because that's the biggest question. What should I run in terms of gas? Now, the recommendation is always the same, non-ethanol in the highest octane possible. You want to avoid the ethanol if at all possible because ethanol is an alcohol. It absorbs moisture. And it traps moisture. So it's going to absorb all the moisture out of your rubber lines, in your carburetor. It's going to cause havoc in your fuel tank. A little something called phase separation occurs, and it's a plague on these classic cars in terms of the fuel tank. Well, in a lot of places you can't get non-ethanol fuel. So the next best bet is to run the highest octane that you can get with the ethanol. Here in Florida, you can get 93 octane with 10% ethanol and run an ethanol neutralizer. I highly recommend VP Madditive or Lucas Safeguard. Those are two fantastic products that I've used on a lot of our cars here, just to try to alleviate a lot of the issues with ethanol. And it seems like either the VP Madditive or Lucas Safeguard products do a fantastic job of neutralizing the ethanol and kind of keeping the issues away that will be caused. Special mentions with fuel go to the Fuelies and high compression motors, of which of course you're going to want to run race fuel, 110 octane leaded. It's going to cost you 10 bucks a gallon for a quality fuel, but you absolutely have to run the race fuel in the fuel injected cars and the high compression motors. Anything 13-to-1 compression or higher, you're going to want to run race fuel all the time in it. Next up, we're going to talk about oil. Now, I'm not going to get into a manufacturer debate here. I don't want my comments section to be a war zone of, Mobil 1 versus Valvoline. I'm not going to talk about manufacturers here. I'm really going to talk more about what I look for in oil to discern whether or not I want to use it in an engine. And in these cars, it's pretty critical that you have the correct zinc content. Zinc, ZDPP, they're both pretty much the same thing. That is an additive that is added to the oil, and we use, I believe it's a Lucas product for all of our zinc. But driven oil actually comes with zinc in it, as does Valvoline VR1 high zinc mineral. We want to also avoid synthetic oils in these classic cars. The main reason we want to go with a conventional, not even a semi-synthetic, is the cork gaskets. The synthetic oils seem to swell the cork gaskets in a lot of these cars. We have a love for Felpro gaskets on a lot of our builds, and they just do not like the full synthetic oils. So we do try to avoid that. If you want to buy an oil that has the zinc or ZDPP already in it, driven oil or Valvoline VR1 high zinc mineral are both fantastic products to use. Also, if you guys want to read about oil, bobistheoilguy.com forums. I mean, you want to talk about hours and hours and hours of reading on oil to be had. I've done a lot of research personally on oil, and that's how I determine who I use on what cars. But in terms of requirements of the oil, it's almost always the same. You want to make sure you have a high zinc content in it, either through a ZDPP additive or something of the sort. Next up, gear oil. Manual transmission oil, rear end. pretty much the same. You always want to make sure you pay attention to the correct weight for your climate. That is really kind of the discerning factor here. I'm a fan of AMSOIL Severe Gear. Also, make sure in the rear end, if it is a limited slip rear, you have to use the correct limited slip additive in these cars. If you don't, you're starting wrong from the get-go. On all of these C2 Corvettes, they have the limited slip additive that is necessary in the rear end, or the rear end will chatter, especially when you go around corners. It will give you a really hard time. So pay attention to the additive that's necessary in the rear end. But AMSOIL Severe Gear is a fantastic gear oil that we use on most of our applications. Check out this 66 Mosport 427 convertible top flight car that just came in. I don't think I've showed you guys this car yet. We have all the emblems and everything off. It just was wet sanded and buffed. We're going over the bottom of the car. I haven't completely cleaned it yet. This is exactly how it came in here, so I'm not going to show you guys too much before I pretty it up, but this is a really nice car from the get-go, so we don't have too much work cut out for us on this. I enjoy getting cars that are close to done, because that way I can put my little spin on it, make it as perfect as I can get it, and move on quickly. As you guys can tell, I have a couple Corvette projects going on in here. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm always doing frame-off restorations, and I'm well known for doing the builds that no one wants to take on because of difficulty purposes. Automatic transmission fluid, please, for the love of God, guys, pay attention to Dexmerk for GM versus Type F for Ford. Don't put Dexmerk in your Ford or put Type F in your GM vehicle. I've seen that a lot. Don't use any shift improvement fluids. The B&M trick shift is going to cause issues. I mean, you can use pretty much any brand of transmission fluid, but again, it's application specific. You have to pick the appropriate fluid for the application. Power steering fluid. This is a big debate. Should you use the actual power steering fluid, or should you use ATF? Now, you guys are probably familiar with both fluids. They're both hydraulic fluids, so they're going to accomplish the same thing. But we always verge on what the manufacturer used when the car was built. In most of these cars, 1976 and older, you're going to use ATF in the power steering fluid reservoir. It's going to be red. It's just more conductive to life of the seals is the reason that we use the ATF versus the clear power steering fluid. Coolant. We always want to use glycol-based green coolant in these cars. I am not a fan of Evans or other waterless coolants, mainly because for a few reasons. They're really expensive. If you do have an emergency on the side of the road and you need to replace the coolant, you cannot mix waterless coolants with standard water or other coolants. It really puts you in a bind if you need to have the coolant on hand and it's not readily available. A lot of these things you have to order online, and it causes big issues. What do we got next on the list? The brake fluid. .3. Always pay attention to application of the brake fluid. Don't put .4 or 5 silicone fluid in your standard car. You have to make sure that your brake reservoir, your master cylinder, and all of your calipers and all of your hoses are good to go with the .5. We do a lot of Willwood kits that actually specify the Willwood fluid. That is absolutely fine. Just make sure that you completely purge the system. You have to clear all the lines, and if you're going to use an application-specific type fluid, do not cross-contaminate the fluids. That's where you can really go wrong. Do not deviate from the spec on the fluids. In our case, standard .3 is used on many of the cars that I build that don't have aftermarket brake systems like the Willwood or the Bayer or so on and so forth. Grease. What do you grease all the cars with, or what do I? Lucas Red and Tacky. It's a fantastic grease. It doesn't get real nasty if you have to spread it. A lot of guys like to use the farm style grease. It's like green. John Deere sells it. But I like the Red and Tacky just because it's cleaner. If you have to wipe it, it doesn't smear in a color, and it's just a fantastic grease in terms of lubrication. There's a lot of topics here that I'm not going to cover today, guys. Organic versus ceramic brake pads and shoes, iridium and platinum spark plugs versus standard copper plugs, nitrogen in the tires, points conversion to magnetic pickup, fuel cleaners like seafoam, etc. And then exterior and interior maintenance. I don't want you guys to feel like I forgot about those points and those topics, but I just don't have enough time in today's video. And I really wanted to hammer on you guys why I pick what I pick in terms of fluids. You know, if the oil doesn't have the correct zinc content, it doesn't matter how great the base oil is, for these cars, it's not going to do what is necessary in terms of lubrication for the valve train. You know, rockers, lifters, push rods, things like that. It's really critical that you have correct lubrication in these. And by the way, this engine is going to be completely pulled apart, re-cleaned, painted, paint the entire engine bay. So please don't judge me on the ugly engine bay, nor the interior. The interior is actually coming together pretty nice. We have the red dashboard in here. We have the carpet kit in. This thing looks really, really fly. So I'm happy with how it's coming out. I'll update you guys when we do the body onto the frame over here. That's going to be my next video. But thank you guys so much for joining me. And until next time, take care.